and it's also in this country. People don't know very much about Africa. They have very little understanding. They don't know, for example, that the Greeks learned from the black Egyptians, that the black people in Egypt taught the Greeks geometry and mathematics and medicine, law and architecture and astronomy and philosophy and religion even. The first name of God was announced on the continent of Africa. No other people announced the name of God before the African people, you see. And now let me just show you what we learned from Africa itself. And this is the evidence from Strabo, one of the writers, ancient writers of Europe, said, for example, geometry was invented, it is said, from the measurement of lands, which is made necessary by the Nile when it confounds the boundaries of the time of its overflows. This science then is believed to have come to the Greeks from the Egyptians. Where's geometry from? The fact that the Nile overflowed its banks and destroyed different farms and lands, and you had to parcel out the land again after the floods. You had to divide it, measure it. So if you had to measure it, then you create drawing lines. You know what I'm saying? And making, if you had so many square feet before or meters, then we give you the same amount. You see, that's where geometry came from. Anybody who tells you that the Greeks created geometry then must be lying, because the Greeks themselves say that they got it from Egypt. But look at this. Not only that, the science which relates neither to pleasure nor yet to the necessities of life were invented first in those places where men had leisure. Thus the mathematical sciences originated in Egypt, because there the priestly class had leisure. Who said that? The Greek Aristotle. Aristotle didn't say, I'm going to claim, as a Greek, I'm going to claim that we did this, we had it. No, he said, no. It came from Africa. He specifically said it in his book, Metaphysics. He writes this. So we know geometry and mathematics come from Africa. Egypt is in Africa. That's why I showed you the map. There's no other continent, you see. I mean, I know people are confused by that, because I spoke to a 7th grade class in Buffalo, New York a few years ago and asked them on which continent is Egypt, and they said Europe. So how do you think people come to that? I was discussing with Brother Beretta here earlier today about how people are miseducated. How somebody come with the thought that Egypt is in Europe, and they're in school. They're learning. They're going to be leaders, presidents and stuff, And this is the knowledge that they have. But then philosophy also comes from Africa. Thales, and that name you may not have heard of, but Thales was the first Greek philosopher. That means he's before Socrates, he's before Isocrates, he's before Plato, he's before Aristotle. He's the first Greek philosopher, Thales, right? Thales had no instructor except the Egyptian priest with whom he spent time in Egypt. That's according to Diogenes. That's what he writes. He said, even Thales, the first of the Greek philosophers, had no instructor except the black people. Who else instructed him in philosophy? Thales of Miletus made voyages to the priests and the astronomers of Egypt, and according to his biographers, he learned geometry from the Egyptians. He learned all kinds of things from the Egyptians, you see. So now, but I'm building up to you to tell you why the Arabs have taken the position that they have taken. They're taking the same position the Europeans took. Isocrates wrote in his book called Bucerus. He says, of whom Pythagoras of Samos, and we have heard about the Pythagorean theorem, right? By Pythagoras. Pythagoras of Samos is one. On a visit to Egypt, he became a student of the religion of the people and was first to bring to the Greeks all philosophy, not just a little bit of it. He brought all philosophy, and more conspicuously than others, he seriously interested himself in sacrifices and in ceremonial purity. Who's writing about him? Socrates, who was a philosopher who lived after Pythagoras. He says Pythagoras, Thales, first philosopher of note of the Greeks. Pythagoras, second philosopher of note of the Greeks. And Pythagoras spent 22 years in Egypt. And what do they bring to Greece when they go back home? They brought philosophy. You can't even, so there's no discussion here. There's no argument. Even the Greeks themselves said it, and they laid it out. In fact, Herodotus said this about the Greek borrowing from Egypt. Melampus, who was a wise man, acquired the art of divination, having become acquainted with the worship of Bacchus through knowledge derived from Egypt, introduced it into Greece. That's why George G.M. James, a great African scholar who taught at the Black College in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, wrote the great book in the 1950s called Stolen Legacy. There is no Greek philosophy. There is only stolen African philosophy.
That's right.
And he proved it line by line.